Hello and welcome. My name is Carol Carter. I'm the founder and CEO of Global Minded. We are all about creating a capable and diverse talent pipeline to get more women, people of color, underrepresented populations into the education, economic mobility, and leadership pipeline. So thank you for joining us today. This is a series of sessions we're doing called Courageous Conversations, Catalyzing Change. And this one in particular is in the area of foundations and funders. We have a number of different equity teams. We have one for STEM, one for technology, one for K-12, higher education. And this is a launch today for our equity team for foundations and funders. So we're delighted to have the panelists who are joining today. We're very glad for each of you who are making this topic a priority to see how the money can move more equitably within foundations and funders. And it is my great pleasure to introduce the panel leader today, Janet Salazar, who's the president of the Foundation for the Support of the United Nations. Janet has built a solid ecosystem of deep connections and influences with the global diplomatic community and is a strong voice for public-private partnerships inside the United Nations. Her influence on leadership decisions has fostered strong partnerships leading to many global collaborations. She brings a business perspective into the UN by convening dialogues around global issues in partnerships with UN entities, UN missions, and Fortune 500 companies. So it's my pleasure to now pass the mic to Janet. Welcome, Janet. Welcome, panelists.
Thank you so much, Carol, and I am truly delighted to be here. Thank you for your leadership, and thank you for getting us all together. I am happy to be joined by our esteemed panelists as well, and really fortunate to have with us 5 of today's most inspiring and influential voices in the space of funding, foundations, and equity. We have Matt Horton, Director for Milken Institute Center for Regional Economics, Dr. Lisa Roy, Director of Program Development, Buffett Early Childhood Institute, University of Nebraska. We have Toya Wall, Senior Program Officer, Ascendium Education Group. We have Karen Robinson, Program Director, Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights, and Luis Duarte, Partner at Imaginable Futures. All right, I think without much ado, I am so excited to learn from everyone, and I'm sure all of our audience are also as excited. Matt, I want to start with you. How are you personally and as an organization responding to this crisis at this time? Well, as you know, we have had the funding sector specifically has had to rapidly address this multi-crisis that we've had almost the entire 2020. We have COVID-19, we have the human rights, inequality, racism, you know, all this multi-crisis, not just in the United States, but have really reverberated all over the world, has created a lot of awareness from all levels, you know, in us, in terms of how systemic this crisis are. And so we wanted to know what your thoughts are and how are you personally, and of course your organization, dealing with all these crises and specifically in the space of where you are working. Yeah.
Thanks a lot. Really excited to be here. Thanks for having me, Carol and Global Minded team. It's a great question, and this, you know, I should introduce the agency. The Institute is a nonprofit economic policy think tank. The Milken Foundation puts a lot of money into recognizing esteemed educators around the country, but the Institute really focuses in on a number of different policy solutions, local, state level, capital markets. I'm at our Center for Regional Economics and California Center, and we kind of look at some broad-based economic policy and some recovery efforts, especially related to COVID. And your question reminds me of like how this kind of all started for me. If you rewind a bit back towards the beginning of this year, I was sitting in a hotel room in advance of the Sorensen Impact Summits, and an Impact Investment Summit that they do every year in Seattle. And I was watching a documentary about the impacts of the Chicago heat wave in 1995. And if and like COVID, these black swan events have created a tremendous amount of impact on communities of color, Black and brown people. And it might not be intentional, but it's not an accident. And, you know, we look at the systemic issues that underline some of these impacts on underserved communities, Black and brown people around the country. And we have to ask ourselves, you know, how have we allowed this to occur? Is it a breakdown of funding levels that support housing? Is it an education level? Why are, you know, 8% of the Black population predominantly make up the 40% of the homelessness population? So, you know, how are we thinking about these types of things in terms of equitable funding levels for housing? How do we talk to local leaders about the talent pipeline and making sure people have access to good jobs? These are all the types of programs that we're trying to incubate in terms of the policy landscape and coming up with more actionable solutions that address some of these underlying and systemic deficiencies.
Wow, that's amazing. We'll get back to you on a follow-up question later in terms of the shifts that has happened, you know, in the course of this multi-crisis happenings that we're dealing with this year. Foremost, of course, is the pandemic. Lisa, any thoughts on your end as well? And please don't forget to also share with us what you do with your organization. Thank you.
Thank you, Janet. I'm the Director of Program Development at the Buffett Early Childhood Institute. The Institute focuses on children and families, but specifically children birth to 3rd grade. We have an initiative called the Superintendent's Plan that is funded by mill dollars to support closing the opportunity gap. And in our space, it's been really interesting. We've served Metro Omaha, worked with 11 superintendents, and there is disparity. As Matt talked about, we have school districts that didn't skip a beat because kids had their computers and the technology. And when doors closed on March 13th, they carried on. And they had, in some ways, been prepared for this because they did a certain amount of hybrid learning, incorporated that into their teaching. And then we had our largest district, Omaha Public Schools, where the high school students had computers, but not necessarily the technology connection for those computers. So they might not have had internet, or even if they had internet, there wasn't the capacity for everyone in the household to use it. So really saw those disparities again that Matt talked about. And then you deal with food, you deal with the fact that the majority of families who were, I would say, on the border, you know, between working class and low income, having to go out and having to put their families at risk if the grandma was living with them. So the trauma, the stress was all there. So a lot of the work that we did was focusing on shifting from making sure that we were closing the learning gap to closing that gap around basic needs and supporting in ways that we could. And schools were the leaders in that. Districts were the leaders in that. And we were there with our staff to adapt and adjust. So you know, just to answer your question, I think nationally, everyone has had to figure that out, but it has exacerbated the disparities for children and families. And it will be interesting to see what happens ultimately with what we call COVID learning loss, and thinking about how we accelerate learning for more students. So I'll stop there.
Fantastic. I like that. I wanted to know more later about COVID learning loss. I'm sure it's a major issue and a concern as well. Thank you, Lisa. And let's go to Toya. Toya, can you please share with us how are you personally and your organization dealing with this current environment in terms of this multi-crisis?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. It's so good to be with all of you today. So I am a senior program officer with Ascendium Education Group, and we are a nonprofit corporation. I work on our philanthropy team, and our grant making focuses on post-secondary and workforce success for low-income people. And my work specifically focuses on incarcerated learners, so people who are pursuing a post-secondary education while in a secure facility. And I think, for me personally, I think that's a very nice question. I think it's been a time of reflection and trying to come to a practice of like gratitude and humility and compassion, which unfortunately for me, I've had to be reminded of by some of my more disciplined peers, I would say, who somehow seem just more able to maintain more of an equilibrium at times. And but it's this type of moment, I think I'm able to deeply think about how I want to show up in the world. And so I've had the full range of emotional responses to the pandemic, but now I'm much more at this place of clarity. And I think it's been a weird juxtaposition because at no point during the pandemic was I ever in personal crisis, right? I had challenges for sure, but 2020 is by far not the worst time in my own life. And yet I know the world and some of the people who I love the most are in crisis. And so it's just been important to sort of reconsider and deepen my values. I'm an INFJ, if you're familiar with Myers-Briggs. So my partner would say the J is strong in me. So I'm naturally a critic of the world. And I think this moment is teaching me how to be more of a perceiver than a judger. And so grateful for that journey. At Ascendium, the first thing I'll note is that I felt very supported as a staff member. I'm really happy with the personnel response of the corporation. I think they did a lot of things to very quickly shift and change in response to the pandemic. And so haven't felt in crisis in part because of some of that support. And I would say our philanthropic response has been typical in terms of what most funders did in the moment. We established a couple of rapid response impact funds so that we could get money out the door very quickly. We proactively reached out to our partners and committed to being as flexible and supportive as possible in terms of grant deliverables and reallocation of dollars and reporting requirements and that type of thing. We also made several racial equity specific grants to local organizations in the Madison, Wisconsin area where we're headquartered. And it's not an exhaustive list, but those are sort of some of the mainstays. But I think what's really important is that we're on a journey that's like triggered something for us, and we've committed to being curious and proactive listeners for the purpose, I think, of adaptation. We had recently just developed a new strategy, and we're fortunate because it's fairly applicable to the moment, but I think now more than ever, we're primed to sort of reinterpret that strategy as necessary and as a mode of practice and is informed by what's really happening around us versus trying to fit the world into our little box for the next 5 or so years. So yeah, I think that's some of what we've done on an equity front. I think we have a pretty diverse team, which is something that we've been intentional about. And so it's one area of the sort of on the DEI spectrum that I think we're gaining some traction and can be really proud of. But I'll be honest, we're really early on in our equity journey in terms of actionable items that we've made progress on. But I think we're really well positioned because our grant making focuses on people of color and veterans and people from rural communities and people who are incarcerated. And so we have these populations as our primary motivators. And now our long-term journey, I think, is just figuring out how to make the most difference for those groups by ensuring that we have the right people at the table, that we're investing where it matters, and that we're flexible and adaptive, and that we ultimately have an organizational culture that helps sustain all of those efforts. So yeah, I think those are some of the things that we've been doing.
Thank you. You've mentioned quite a few very refreshing insights and shares with us. So we'll talk more about that later. And but specifically wanted to just mention how critical and important it is with one of your focuses, which is the education for the incarcerated people. I think that is something that oftentimes overlooked even in our society, and to have that hopefully be mainstreamed through your efforts and your organization's efforts, I think would be really critical. Again, thank you for sharing. And Luis, we would love to hear more about what you do at Imaginable Futures. And again, 9 months into this crisis that we're dealing with, how are you personally and as an organization dealing with all of it?
Thank you, Janet. And as I shared at the beginning of kind of joining the call, it's just I'm always thankful, Carol and team, for giving us the opportunity to share some of the things that in which we fail, in which we learn, in which we thrive. Because it's just an amazing platform, I think, for all of us to be better as citizens, as kind of members of organizations. And so thank you for the opportunity. I think, Janet, for me personally, very similar, I think, to what Toya said. It's been a time of deep reflection, introspection, and gratitude. I think kind of the work that I get to do with Imaginable Futures, it's kind of incredibly privileged, and we get to sit in a place of really trying to be as responsive as we can, but we're still, all of us have a job, all of us kind of are just blessed with a lot of different platforms that we can kind of gain support with or from. So at Imaginable Futures, I am part of a small team. We're about 18 folks, and we're spread across the globe. And all of our work is really focused on how do we catalyze human potential through learning. So we do a lot of philanthropic giving and a lot of investments, for-profit investments in Latin America and Africa and in the US. And we go all the way from the littlest learners. So we do some work on early childhood, as Lisa knows, and then all the way to workforce as well, and upskilling. And the one thing that was interesting for us this year, we started a strategy refresh in January. And then I think it was late February where we were getting a lot of people together, and we had that workshop, and then everything just exploded. And what's so interesting is that in that workshop, we asked participants in Kenya and in Brazil to map the educational system from their purview. And the question was, what are the forces that are enabling or inhibiting that human potential can actually thrive in your community? And with that exercise, they created this amazing map. And then COVID hit, and we saw, oh, the map will definitely change. All these patterns that we saw will need to go back. The map stayed the same, and all the systemic barriers just were exacerbated, right? So I think since March, we have been then in such a, I think, deep recognition of how even our theory of change or investment thesis should completely shift into how are we tackling systemic racism? How are we tackling systemic inequities? And what role are we playing in the system that we're kind of reinforcing patterns of inequities that we need to stop? And then how do we need to shift at the individual level, at the organizational level, the way we source pipeline, the way we even make decisions, and who do we make decisions for or with? So we're reevaluating a lot of things in terms of how we show up as a different funder in the community. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Luis. And that's actually what you mentioned is a perfect segue to our next question, which is, Matt, this would be for you. in taking into context the big sort of industry or space we're all in, which is funding and the need for equity in that, and what kind of solutions, are necessary so that we give light or, give solutions to more equitable funding and resources and access to this. Based on your experience, in your organization and with your partners, what kinds of things do you think needs to shift if we are to really move forward with a more equitable solutions for funding and access to resources?
Yeah, it's such a fundamental question. Sticking on that workforce theme, we've been looking a lot before the pandemic and after about the role of the future of work from an equity and access level, and how regions, states can engineer more equity and access in the talent pipeline that lead to better opportunities. I think all of that's only accelerated. I mean, this whole idea about the future of work is only accelerated displacement and automation. So I think, to really engineer some equity into the talent pipeline, we have to think about how the consequences are playing out right now throughout the economic landscape around the country, who has access to broadband, who doesn't, who's been displaced from work, what essential work even means now. And we have to maybe shift from a more reactive kind of talent pipeline and to a much more proactive positioning around a regional approach to workforce development, to competitiveness, to on-the-job learning. We have to somehow triage the immediate displacement, but also arrive at a system that allows for more mobility, more economic opportunity. I mean, it's easier said than done, but I think the keys to revitalizing this a more equitable 21st century workforce landscape is really focused on the skills and who has access to this on-demand skills, tech-based skills that are driving this idea of the future of work, work-based training programs, apprenticeship models. All of these things have some anecdotal benefits and solutions, but at scale and with the types of bold philanthropic kind of funding in partnership with the public sector and business leaders, we can really see these things take hold and provide more opportunities to folks where they are.
Very enlightening. Thank you so much, Matt. And Lisa, we come to you with the same question. Based on your experience and being at the front line of what you do in this space, what can you tell us about what needs to shift if we are to make this better, pretty much?
Well, I like the word shift, but I think we need to transform. And for me, I wrote down a couple of things that I was thinking through. I did some work around equity with Grantmakers for education, and we talked about the hero's journey and how we really need to get through understanding how to develop our own knowledge and compassion and how we encounter others and our journey, whether it's funding or providing direct service, whatever we're doing to transform systems. It starts with understanding power and privilege. And we all talked about, and Toya, you mentioned, hey, I'm doing okay. I have to be reminded sometimes about what's going on with the rest of the world. And that's a privilege thing, right? And I'm here in Colorado right now because I needed to give my kids a break, literally. 9 months, they've been working with kids at home and halfway losing their minds. So now I get to lose my mind. They're out of the house for at least this hour, but it's challenging. It's challenging for parents, no matter what your income, to have kids of different ages at home and make sure that their learning and development is ongoing and that they're thriving. And it's so important for our own mental health to be at its best so that our children are okay. So again, going back to that transformation piece, Luis and Matt and Toya have all talked about in different ways how the pandemic has exacerbated disparity. So we need to build more and new inclusive systems and cultures. We need to change our norms, values, and practices because, again, some are being advantaged by the system and others are being more disadvantaged by what's going on. And people are, I would say, you know, the stat on homelessness, there's a large homeless population here in Denver. And Carol, I know you walk by the 16th Street Mall, and I'm over on 23rd and Stout where my son lives behind United Way. And I tell you, it's an interesting village here. And the majority of people that I see are people of color. And you go, what's going on? What is the pandemic showing us about our society and what we value and the types of resources we put into place? And I will say, in working in philanthropy for decades, it's important that you have the people at the table to tell you what works for them. And I've heard that in this session already. We think we have the answers, and in philanthropy, a lot of this comes from passion. We have these passion projects, and you have this money, and you want to have an impact. But if you don't go to the source and you don't think about how to change things at that source, then you're putting a Band-Aid on. And so we need to understand history, how we've got to where we are, our own biases. We need to build empathy and respect and get comfortable with our own vulnerability and be comfortable with conflict because, again, there's what we think we should be doing and there's what our families tell us that they really need. And then constantly commit to our ongoing learning and our own transformation. I will just very quickly say, there's been times as a middle-class educated woman, being Black, I thought I knew it was best sometimes for my own community. No, I knew better than to say I represented everybody in my community, but sometimes I thought I knew what was best. And I had to have some folks pull me to the side and say, no, sister, you do not represent me, and this is why. And those were transforming conversations, and we all need to have those. So whether you're, like I said, whether you're a funder or you are specifically working on an initiative or a shift, as you talked about, Janet, in a system, again, if we don't talk to those who are impacted the most by it, we're missing an opportunity.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for sharing with us a lot of those pain points that I'm sure we all identify with for the most part of it. And Carol just shared a very sobering reality here that typically in the United States, we have 1.8 million homeless people. And this year, because of everything that's going on, it is predicted to be about 8 million. So that's like more
there's a eviction bomb that's about to go off in the economy if there's not some more protections for people. It's just it's completely a disaster unfolding, waiting to happen.
I know. Yeah. And yep. All right. So Toya, we come to you with the same question. What do you think needs to shift or change in the space? And again, with you being at the forefront of what you're doing, can you share with us more about this, your insights?
Yeah, I think it has in philanthropy, I think it has a lot to do with intersector and cross-sector collaboration, as well as cross-cultural collaboration. So if you think about a Syndium strategy, it's rooted in this sort of quintessential equitable access to opportunity premise, which I've heard a lot of folks have that sort of same premise. And rather than seeing opportunity as this sort of amorphous, almost romanticized idea, we understand it as having an actual infrastructure with parameters and conditions that need to be met. And so being serious about equitable access to opportunity means we have to work at a structural design level and understand precisely where and how our systems of opportunity are failing us. But then also fine-tuning our antennas so that we know when it's time to design something wholly new to make up for the limitations of current systems that have just proven themselves time and time again just resistant to change. When I think about it that way, and when I think about to what extent do all people have equitable access to a means of material prosperity? And I think about how easy is it for people to move from not enough to enough and beyond. I think that type of consideration helps to not only underscore the comprehensiveness of the issue that we're tackling, but it also stresses the fact that at Ascendium, we're working on just a tiny small piece of a gigantic puzzle. We're focused on skill and knowledge enhancement post-high school as one means of upward mobility. And we're clear that it's not the only work to be done, far from it, because a lot has to go right at the primary and secondary levels in order for individuals to take advantage of opportunity post-high school. And more generally, people just have to have enough of the good basic things at the very outset of life, I think, before any of our work is relevant, and honestly, before any of our opportunity systems as designed have any real merit, because they're designed as a progression, right? Like presumably, best case scenario, we're picking up where something else presumably left off, and then worst case scenario, we're trying to be a very inadequate answer to the question of what happens when people don't get what they need at the outset, or what happens when someone temporarily loses their way, which is, by the way, to some extent how we contextualize our work inside prisons. But my point is, even though we understand this, and I'm saying we now as a sector, not as Ascendium, it's still not normal practice to work together as funders, as an ecosystem. And I'm not talking about co-funding a project for leverage. I'm talking about a much deeper collaboration, something that more similar to what we might expect of our nonprofit partners. And it's still not normal practice to work across sectors. And it's still not normal practice to immerse ourselves in the knowledge and wisdom of directly impacted people. I remember when I started in philanthropy as a fellow, one of the first projects a senior program officer assigned to me was research on the efficacy of general operating support, because he was frustrated that the foundation wouldn't move in that direction. Well, that was in 2009. So there it is right there. And for me, it's like, it's right there in front of us. It's been there for some time. And to a large extent, we already know what we should be doing as a field, at least some steps that we can take. So I don't know if we're like in one of solutions. And I'm generalizing because I think there's certainly lots of philanthropic organizations that are getting a lot of that right and are aiming in that direction. I think Ascendium is aiming in that direction. But I think that's the move, that's the shift, deeper collaboration and literally applying the lessons we've already learned a decade ago and a decade before that.
Thank you, Toya. So it's the big word, big word right there is collaboration, right? Let's see. Okay, a couple of side notes before we call on Luis to share with us his insights. Karen Robinson, one of our speakers, is having trouble with her internet, so she is actually joining us via phone. And Luis, after we hear from you, we're going to call on Karen to share with us her insights as well. Karen, can you just say hello to everyone? Are you there? All right, we're not hearing from Karen so far. Okay, moving on to Luis. Hopefully we can get Karen online, after Luis shares with us his insights. Luis, from your own perspective and your own experience, can you tell us what needs to shift or what needs to change in this entire space?
Thank you, Janet. I have little to add to what Toya, Matt, and Lisa have added. I think it's interesting, right? Because at the end of the day, we sometimes look at the system as if we are not part of it, right? Or inside of it. And I think the most important shift or transformation, love that word, Lisa, I think it has to come within us. I think it's our own commitment to change our own practices. It's our own commitment to learn about the history that we didn't learn because the system was not allowing us to learn the other side of the history. It's our own commitment to interrupt for justice and to speak up for those that are not at the table, and then to bring them to the table. So I think part of the most important, if not the most important transformation in the sector needs to come from us. And then when you up a level, I think organizationally, philanthropy, we sometimes forget that the meaning of the word is for the love of mankind or for the love of humanity, right? And we are sometimes so tied into we need to control this grant and we need to put milestones and benchmarks and we have at Imaginable Futures, we have the comparison of investing equity in for-profit companies and then philanthropic giving in nonprofit entities. And sometimes when you invest in a for-profit company, you trust the entrepreneur, they are raising capital, they have their plans, they have their benchmarks, and you're like, okay, I'm in the risk with you, and I'll try to support and I'll try to bring all my network. And then with the nonprofits, there's a lot of questions. There's like, but how, and what's the plan, and are you sure you need this grant, and how are we going to measure it? It's a very interesting way that that sometimes as funders we put this, we need to have control rather than let go of control and really trust the people that know better than any of us, right? So that's at the organizational level. I think there's a transformation and shift that needs to happen at that level. And then completely agree with Toya in terms of collaboration and intersectionality. We have designed a system that it's all about silos, right? Early childhood is here, and then child development might be here because it's health, and then housing is here, but families and our families, they don't live in silos, right? We are a unit, right? And when you get affected from this side, it ripples to all the other fronts that you have in front of you. So it seems easier to say, you know what I'm really interested is just in this slice of the pie because that's what I can control, or that's what I know. I think the transformation and shift should be one that how can we best collaborate as funders, as government, and try to bring holistic supports and holistic solutions to the challenges that we have in front of us. And there's definitely bright spots happening, but there's the opportunity and the transformation there. It's super important. So I'll stop there.
Thank you, Luis. Somehow you've always managed to lead us to what will be the next question. And my next question would, I think, would be is something that Matt would be so will have a lot of appetite, I must say, to talk about, because I know with this short introduction together, I right away felt how passionate he is in this entire topic. I mean, we all are, but especially Matt. I can feel that passion coming off the screen, actually, in terms of addressing these issues. And so, Matt, tell us about, this is for you, and I know you've got a lot of insights to share with us, but let's talk about leadership. Let's talk about leadership in this entire space where we're all in: philanthropy, funding, access to resources, equitable, access to grants, and all that. Tell us about leadership and the role it has. What are the key elements that also needs to transform there? Borrowing Lisa's word, transformation, and to shift in that space or to change
Well,
What are your thoughts on this?
well, barring, I mean, I think Luis's point about philanthropic coordination, I think he's being a bit hard on the field. I think barring national, federal leadership here in terms of incentivizing public-private partnerships, public-private philanthropic partnerships, sometimes I call those P4s. I mean, it's hard to understand or even know where to put or how best to partner. So, I mean, like we did with the Community Reinvestment Act, I mean, we could incentivize broader place-based investment scenarios that coordinate capital and help support communities. And it's not a secret. You look at some of the work that Raj Chetty has done in terms of under those communities, those zip codes about prosperity. I mean, it's not hard to find the need. So, I mean, we could use the power of federal monetary and fiscal policy to help direct or incentivize these kind of place-based investments. And like the counter to that, I mean, for too long, those types of financial mechanisms have been the catalyst that support the types of redlining and disinvestment that we see that we're currently dealing with. So, I mean, that doesn't mean that state and local leaders can't come together and figure out the types of solutions in that regard, using the power of capital F state and local powers, capital F federalism. But there's just a number of different types of leadership conversations we should be leaning into here about how to engage with state and local leaders, county supervisors, mayors, governors, along with the philanthropic community, but also with our national representation about how to best set the table in terms of community reinvestment and the types of using that as a starting place to get more into the weeds about the types of jobs, business formation, economic development mechanisms that some of our communities are really crying out for. I mean, these are the types of investments that we should be prioritizing if we want to have a really viable, not just national recovery, but a really viable economic landscape that is prosperous and all of those great things that lead to opportunity.
Those are really, really amazing points. Thank you, Matt. Lisa, what are your insights? Any additional thoughts on what Matt just mentioned?
Well, I would say, because we talked about history and transformation and education, almost everything that we've done that's good for students, we had to fight for legally. So if you look at landmark cases throughout, including Brown versus the Board of Education, we do not really believe education is a right of children in some places and spaces, or I should say all children. So we really have to, if we're thinking about, again, shifting or transformation or leadership, we've got to undo a lot of systems and structures that have been set up for children and families to fail across the board. I mean, our government actually put laws into place that made it, again, difficult for some over others to buy a home, to start a business, to get a low interest rate loan for anything. And I can go on and on and on and on, just based on the color of your skin or based on your last name or your first name. And so when I'm talking about changing systems and structures for foundations and to partner around turning that around, hundreds of years of oppression and its impact. So some of us fared okay, based on supports that we've had from either family or the community, but not everyone has been able to climb out of that hole. And so I just think it's important when we're talking about leadership, leadership should look like the people that are being served. For instance, so if the majority of the people that you're serving, for instance, in the US are students of color, then principals, superintendents, teachers, nurses, counselors, early childhood leaders should look like those children that they're serving. It should be representative. And so I have been fortunate to, and I can't leak it because I think the organization that funded it is going to do a press release, but we're doing a Grow Your Own Omaha initiative for high school students of color to get into early childhood teaching field. And it's very exciting. And I know Denver's done this, other places have done it. It's not new and innovative, but guess what? We still have a long way to go. The majority of teachers in the US are white females. The majority of children are not represented in that way. And so I know I have a lot of work to do in whatever space and place I am to mitigate that. And it's a mission of mine for sure. And I know the only other thing I will say in philanthropy, it's got to look that way everywhere. And I know Toya and Matt and Luis, and I'm sure you, Janet, have, and it's obviously Global Minded Ed's mission. We all are committed to this work. That's why Carol has invited us here. We're all passionate about it in different ways for different reasons.
Absolutely. Thank you again, Lisa, so much. And Toya, any additional thoughts on this as well before I call in Luis?
Yeah, I feel like I'm losing my light. So I feel like I'm getting dark.
A little dark here.
It gets dark at like 4 o'clock.
Your personal light is glowing.
You know, to use a pop culture reference, here's my hot take. I think that we have a leadership issue in philanthropy, and I'm only calling that out because if we didn't have a leadership problem, we wouldn't have to struggle with these issues decade after decade. I think that's enough data for me to determine that maybe the existing leadership structures in philanthropy don't have the required skills to move the field where it clearly wants to be in 2020. Hopefully that doesn't sound too harsh, but I think that equity is a mindset and a set of related skills. And if that mindset and those particular skills weren't in high demand 10, 20 years ago, of course we're going to have leaders who are unequipped. Does that mean they can't get where they need to be? No, it doesn't. But I think it underscores the importance of ensuring that we're updating our understanding and depiction of what a leader looks and sounds like in an increasingly diverse country. And we need to update the set of skills and experiences that are going to be required for moving us as a field forward. I think the first step to take as a leader in philanthropy is if you're trying to diversify the leadership structure on your team is to really clarify for yourself and understand your own intention. Why do you want to do this? Why do you want to increase diversity throughout your organization? Why is it important to do that throughout the sector? If you're a leader and in your own heart and mind, you can't sincerely answer that question in a way that gets you excited, if you're not bought in, I think you're going to struggle, and you'll struggle not only to take the actual steps to do it, but when you hire someone or promote a person of color or a woman, it's not likely that you're going to create an atmosphere for that person to actually thrive. When I think about like some of the things we can do, some of them are very simple. So Ascendium is well positioned because we have a mostly remote philanthropy staff, and I think what I'm excited about in terms of remote working is that it just instantly enables you to recruit talent from everywhere. So it just automatically diversifies the pool of candidates. It lifts that burden, that barrier to some extent. I think everyone should be looking at their hiring policies, ensuring that it doesn't prevent you from hiring talented people with criminal records. I also think in some cases, and this is back to the idea of tuning our antenna to so that we know when something is beyond repair. But in some cases, the answer for diversifying leadership and philanthropy is really to create sort of spin-off or foundations or funds that are solely governed and run by a more diverse staff and board, particularly of impacted and proximate leaders who can take a completely fresh look at how to get things done. And I like that idea because one of the opportunities it gives you is the chance to completely flip the idea of how boards function. Too often I hear program officers, for example, feeling stifled by their boards, right? Feeling stifled by a group of folks who might not connect with the ideas and current understanding. And that's not something the IRS rules dictate. That's an approach to the work. And I think it's far beyond time for something different. So I think that's one way to get at that. And the last thing I'll say for folks who are thinking about hiring diverse leaders, even if you're not hiring, because I know one of the issues is that philanthropy doesn't hire a lot. People tend to stay in those organizations for a long time, but you can take action by diversifying your network. So where you go to learn, where you go to gather and connect. So the next time that you are hiring, you can send that job announcement out to a much more diverse group of people.
Thank you, Toya. Those are all very profound insights and shares indeed. We have one comment from one of our participants, Praful Shah. To all panelists, there is a systemic economic problem which has created a dire need for philanthropy. So that's the comment. And I want to try Karen again before we go to Luis. Karen, any chance you can join us by phone just to say hello to everyone? I'm sorry,
it did not work. So she's having some kind of funky outage, and I don't know if she doesn't have cell service either, but she's in kind of a remote part of Pennsylvania. So unfortunately, we don't have her today, but we'll hopefully see her in January. Yeah.
Right. Yes. We just wanted to acknowledge you, Karen, and thank you again for your efforts in trying to join us. Karen Robinson is the program director for Robert F. Kennedy Human Rights. And hopefully you can join us next time. Luis, your turn now. Tell us more about what you think about leadership in this entire space where we are all in, and what needs to shift there, what needs to change, or some form of kind of transformation moving forward. What are your thoughts on this one?
Yeah, plus 100 to everything that Toya said. I was also reacting to, even on the hiring practices, it's standard that we ask for a degree rather than experience, right? And even
right.
Just asking why. Like, why is that? Like, why? And just kind of from a leadership perspective or the hiring manager perspective, just pushing the boundaries on this is the way that we have done it always. So we just kind of continue to do that. And now that we know that systemic kind of biases are in all the systems that we play in, especially in education, then just adding that simple line of a degree is needed, you're already kind of taking out a ton of amazing candidates in the pool that could have performed incredible and could have helped you in your journey to be more equitable. So just kind of elevating that point. The other thing I think from leadership is, I think Lisa mentioned this, is you cannot be effective in supporting any type of problem or issue or even just trying to be a part of it or trying to understand it if you're not close to the communities that you're trying to be a part of or trying to support, right? So I think proximity to community and COVID has, the pandemic has really elevated the need for leadership and all of us to listen deeply, right? To just be there. And to the point that Praful was elevating, again, there's this systemic economic kind of and dire need for philanthropy, and what that means, Lisa, you mentioned this. yes, sometimes we say we support education, but if basic needs are not covered and we have the capital to support that, then we should be flexible with our capital. So a call to leaders to say, in this crisis, we need to be much more responsive to the needs of the community, right? And it's, we will not have, for us, we will not have great learning outcomes if we're not supporting basic needs of families, right? And if we're not supporting mental health, if we're not supporting the family. So even though we have kind of this strict way of thinking as funders, in this times of need, we need to be flexible. We need to be responsive. We should always be. But this year is presenting us an opportunity as a great example of the philanthropy, how philanthropy should look like in the future.
Proximity and responsiveness. Thank you so much, Luis. I'm losing my light here. Apologies, but we're coming at the top of our hour, and before I call on our dear Carol to conclude our really this very important panel, I'd love to get a call to action from each of our panelists. In the context of partnerships, collaboration, what needs to change, addressed to pretty much general, in general to all of us in this space, what would be your urgent call to action? And if you can, what are the two most powerful words that you can give us as a parting shot that was mentioned, or that were mentioned in these conversations today? And why is that important to you? So very briefly, I know that's a mouthful, but very briefly, 1 to 2 minutes, and then we go to Carol for our conclusion. Matt, are you there?
Oh, thank you so much, and thanks again. I would say in terms of call to action, we need bold, we need to find and leverage the bold political will to transform economic development around the country. But for the funding community, I think we can really hone in on the need for patient capital to come into communities in a place-based investment kind of scenario, not just to reskill and not just to do the types of to solve some of the transformative infrastructure deficiencies, but you look at the impact of the $1,200 that people were getting at the beginning of the COVID relief that Congress had. Like, people sometimes just need cash to childcare, cash to that type of capital injection is really transformative. So childcare, cash, patient capital, all of these things we need from a place-based investment standpoint.
I love it. I love those words so much too. Very, very important indeed. Thank you so much, Matt. Lisa?
Well, I couldn't agree more, Matt, and definitely there are ways with public-private partnerships to make sure that families can have a livable wage, depending on the number in their family, the age of children, what their zip code is. And so I am very hopeful with our new administration that there'll be some innovation around those opportunities for funders to get into public-private partnerships at the federal and local level. I always say to myself and to others, if you have a solution and you can't pick up the phone and dial someone to ask them how it's going to impact them personally, then you need to get to know the folks that you're wanting to help. So that's my thing. If you don't know a single homeless person or a person who is struggling in school, whatever you're supporting, if you can't call a parent and go, oh, how does it affect you? Or you have a homeless brother, I understand. Any chance that you can give me some insights? Those kinds of things make a real difference. And I think I've heard that consistently from all the panelists, but definitely they should be in your Rolodex.
Amazing. Thank you so much. Proximity. That's what it is, right, Lisa? And access. Thank you so much. I think need to learn more about that. I wanted to take my proximity to the next level. And so this has been also a very enlightening session for me. Thank you so much. Toya, parting shot.
Okay, so I'm more deep collaboration and applying lessons learned, of course, and all of the wonderful things everyone has already said. But I really think if there's a consistent battle taking place in philanthropy, it is a battle of perspectives. And I think you see it like in public discourse too. I wish that growth conversations, those direct, deep, complex, but healthy conversations weren't so scary for us as a field at times, and instead were a normal practice. I come from a family and culture that really just relies on positive confrontation and explicit discussion to grow in our love and understanding of one another. And from the outside looking in, it might appear to be negative, but it is the way that we demonstrate our love, because we're trying to get to each other's truth. And it's not always pretty, but it's not something to be afraid of. So that's one sort of call, I would say, is to lean in to those types of conversations. The other thing I would say, this is more of a leadership topic of discussion. So I think, unfortunately, sometimes philanthropic organizations, there's a desire to sort of look and sound the part of diversity, but to really have no clue or sometimes no intention of actually being transformed as an organization by way of that diversity. And as a leader, you have to think about, how amenable are you to other perspectives? Do you have good mental models or behavioral practices that actually allow you to pursue and incorporate different perspectives than your own? What happens when you don't like what you hear? What do you do with information that feels directly opposed to your way of thinking? How often do you act without understanding any other points of view? And sorry, my kids in the back. Is your organizational culture realistically shifted by the identities and personalities of your staff? Or are you directly or indirectly incentivizing your people to sort of check their identities at the door? And the only last thing I'll say is, I think that we have under-relied on what I like to call the witness base of the people who know and understand as a matter of their lifelong experience and general everyday life orientation, and then have over-relied on the evidence base. And I want to see us sort of balance those two and have them sort of validate each other. Sorry.
Very well said. Thank you, Toya. Great insights. And last but not least, of course, Luis.
Thank you, Janet. I think a few words: proximity for sure, flexibility in a time of crisis, and then I will add power shifting. And an example of that is elevating voices of the people that you're trying to serve in decision-making positions. So those will be my call to action.
Thank you. Short and sweet for Luis on that one. And at this point, I would like to say thank you so much again to our panelists. It has been an honor for me to lead these conversations, and I wanted to connect with you all later on to learn more. I think you all are amazing individuals, both on a personal level, what you do, your passion, and of course being part of this entire space we're all in your organizations. Thank you so much again. Carol, I think this is a point where I call on you and conclude everything.
Thank you, Janet. Well, thank you so much. And it was really great spending the hour with you all. And we're just going to get started on all of these courageous conversations in the space. And I want to just say, my perspective, I'm not from the field of philanthropy, and Global Minded is the first 501c3 that I've had any experience with. But I think that, one thing I would say is the idea of being human, being authentic, I loved what Luis said, that how come in entrepreneurial, you get to get paid and do whatever you want. And in philanthropy, there's a million hoops. You can't even get your basic job done for the services you're trying to provide. That I don't understand. So I just think the more we can share those perspectives and simplify things for people, we'll have better ROI if we can learn to do that. And my kind of call to action is, how can people work with uncommon collaborators, the people who aren't in the circles of the familiar that they know or the familiar of the silo that they've been in, and how can we all be really strong cross-pollinating leaders, because that's how we can really get some great things done. And I'm encouraged that within the administration, they say they want 50% diversity. And I think that is going to be really great, you know, for everybody to have those people represented. And the final thing I'll say is really thinking, Matt, people who run for office, a lot of people who run for office have to have a significant amount of money to run for office. So when we look at how we can get more, you know, of the level playing field of people who have the talent, but maybe they don't have that kind of money, how can we think about how we can elevate those people, their voices, their leadership in all that we're doing. So anyway, so great being with you guys. And I want to invite everybody, as a final thing, everybody who joined us today on December the 9th at 5:30 Eastern, we're going to have our Inclusive Leader Awards across 15 sectors. You know that at Global Minded, for those of you who follow us, our first priority is first generation to college and underrepresented students. And these are the role models for those students across 14 sectors. But we also realize they're the role models for us too, at the end of a really tough year, that we can see these 15 incredible people and their stories and the kinds of things that they've contributed to the world, and really harness that as we get ready to close out this year and go into 2021. So we're gonna make sure you all get a link to that. And then we're co-producing that with Aussie Media, and on December 16th, we'll have a version of that you can all share liberally through all of your networks. And we hope every CEO, every college president, every foundation funder, board person running these organizations will really listen to the wisdom of the people that will be honored. And it will be less than an hour. So it's going to be one high impact hour. So thanks to all of you for this important work and for being part of this bigger Foundations and Funders Equity team. And we'll look forward to seeing you all again in January, and have a wonderful holiday season. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Janet. Bye, guys.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thanks. Nice meeting everyone.
Good to meet you, Matt.
Great to see you guys. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye,
Goodbye.
everyone.
Goodbye.
Thank you, Janet.